I'm about to tell you something that could change your entire understanding of your mental health journey. Something that explains why you've been misdiagnosed multiple times, why treatments haven't worked, and why you've been carrying a label that's been destroying your self-worth and limiting your potential for true healing. What I'm about to share with you is so controversial that many mental health professionals refuse to acknowledge it, but it's a truth that could literally save your life. There's a diagnostic scandal happening right now in mental health care, and you might be caught in the middle of it. 80% of people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder don't actually have a personality disorder at all. They have complex PTSD, and this misdiagnosis isn't just a mistake on paper. It's a life-altering error that determines what kind of treatment you receive, how society sees you, and most importantly, how you see yourself. I know this because I lived it. I know this because I've seen it destroy people who could have been healed if they'd received the right diagnosis. And I know this because the mental health system has been systematically mislabeling trauma survivors as having personality disorders, condemning them to a lifetime of stigma and ineffective treatment. If you've ever been told you have BPD, if you've ever felt like the diagnosis doesn't quite fit, if you've ever wondered why treatments aren't working, then you need to watch every single minute of this video. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me in the comments, have you been diagnosed with BPD when you suspect it might actually be CPTSD? Because what I'm about to share could be the key to your freedom. Let me start with the most damaging lie that's been told about mental health diagnoses, that BPD and CPTSD are basically the same thing. This is not just wrong, it's dangerously wrong. And the consequences of this misdiagnosis are devastating in ways that most people don't realize. Here's what happened to me when I was struggling with my own mental health issues. I was displaying all the classic symptoms: emotional dysregulation, relationship difficulties, a shattered sense of self, intense fear responses. But here's the key difference that no one bothered to explore. All of these symptoms had a clear origin point. They all stemmed from years of psychological warfare in my childhood home, from living in a constant state of hypervigilance, from having my authentic self systematically destroyed by narcissistic abuse. But instead of looking at the cause, instead of understanding that my symptoms were a natural response to chronic trauma, the mental health system wanted to label me as having a personality disorder. They wanted to tell me that there was something fundamentally wrong with my personality, that I was inherently flawed, that I would need to manage these symptoms for the rest of my life. This is the devastating difference between a CPTSD diagnosis and a BPD diagnosis. CPTSD says you were hurt and your symptoms are a normal response to abnormal circumstances. BPD says you are disordered and your symptoms are a reflection of your flawed personality. Do you see the difference? One offers hope for healing. The other condemns you to a lifetime of believing you're broken. Let me break down the real differences between these two conditions, because understanding this could literally change your life. And I'm going to be more specific than any mental health professional has probably ever been with you. CPTSD requires trauma exposure. This isn't optional, it's a prerequisite for the diagnosis. You cannot have CPTSD without a history of chronic, repeated trauma, usually beginning in childhood. This trauma typically involves situations where escape was impossible or extremely dangerous, like being trapped in an abusive household, experiencing ongoing neglect, or being subjected to systematic psychological torture by the people who are supposed to protect you. BPD, on the other hand, does not require trauma exposure. While many people with BPD have experienced trauma, it's not a requirement for the diagnosis. This is a crucial distinction because it means that BPD is viewed as a personality disorder that can develop from various factors, including genetics, brain chemistry, and environmental influences that may or may not include trauma. But here's where it gets even more important: the sense of self. People with CPTSD typically have a consistently negative self-image. They see themselves as fundamentally flawed, worthless, or damaged, and this self-perception remains relatively stable over time. It's painful, but it's consistent. People with BPD, however, have an unstable sense of self. Their self-image fluctuates dramatically. They might feel amazing about themselves one day and completely worthless the next. They literally don't know who they are from moment to moment. The relationship patterns are also completely different. People with CPTSD tend to avoid deep connections because they've learned that intimacy equals danger. They withdraw. They keep people at a distance. They struggle to trust anyone because their primary caregivers taught them that love comes with violence. People with BPD, however, desperately crave connection while simultaneously fearing abandonment. They engage in what we call approach avoidance behaviors, pulling people close and then pushing them away, idealizing someone and then devaluing them, doing everything possible to avoid real or perceived abandonment. The emotional dysregulation looks different too. In CPTSD, emotional problems stem from an inability to self-soothe when upset, leading to emotional numbing as a protective mechanism. In BPD, emotional dysregulation manifests as intense, uncontrollable emotions that can shift rapidly, often accompanied by impulsive behaviors. Now here's the part that's going to make you angry, and it should. The mental health system has been systematically misdiagnosing trauma survivors for decades. Studies show that up to 80% of people diagnosed with BPD actually have CPTSD, but they're being given the wrong label because CPTSD isn't even recognized in the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual used in the United States. This isn't just an academic distinction. This misdiagnosis has real, devastating consequences. BPD is one of the most stigmatized mental health diagnoses in existence. Even mental health professionals harbor negative attitudes toward people with BPD. They view them as manipulative, difficult, treatment-resistant, and attention-seeking. Many therapists refuse to work with BPD patients, and those who do often approach the therapeutic relationship with preconceived notions about how treatment will go. Imagine being a trauma survivor who's already been taught that they're worthless, that they're too much, that they're fundamentally flawed, and then receiving a diagnosis that reinforces every negative belief you've ever had about yourself. Imagine being told that your trauma responses are actually personality defects that you'll need to manage for the rest of your life. This is what happens when CPTSD is misdiagnosed as BPD. The person doesn't just receive ineffective treatment, they receive a label that becomes part of their identity, a label that carries massive stigma and reinforces their trauma-based beliefs about themselves. The treatment approaches are also completely different. BPD treatment typically focuses on behavior modification, emotional regulation skills, and managing symptoms. The most common approach is dialectical behavior therapy, which teaches coping skills and distress tolerance. While these skills can be helpful, they don't address the root cause of the problem, the trauma that created the symptoms in the first place. CPTSD treatment, on the other hand, is trauma-focused. It addresses the root cause of the symptoms by helping the person process and heal from their traumatic experiences. Treatment approaches include trauma-focused CBT, MDR, somatic therapies, and other modalities that specifically target trauma-related symptoms. Do you see the difference? One approach tries to help you manage your symptoms. The other approach tries to heal the cause of your symptoms. One keeps you in a cycle of coping. The other offers the possibility of genuine recovery. But here's what's even more insidious about this misdiagnosis. It serves the mental health system's interests, not yours. When you're diagnosed with BPD, you become a long-term client. You're told that personality disorders are chronic conditions that require ongoing management. You're set up for years of therapy, medication trials, and symptom management. When you're diagnosed with CPTSD, however, The focus is on healing the trauma that caused your symptoms. While this can be intensive work, it offers the possibility of genuine recovery, not just symptom management. The mental health system makes more money from chronic conditions than from conditions that can be fully healed. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a business reality. The entire system is set up to manage symptoms, not to cure conditions. Let me give you some specific examples of how this misdiagnosis plays out in real life. Sarah, a woman I mentioned earlier, has been in therapy for over 10 years with a BPD diagnosis. She's tried multiple therapists, been on dozens of medications, and participated in numerous DBT programs. But her symptoms persist because no one has ever addressed the root cause, the chronic childhood abuse that created her trauma responses. Her symptoms aren't a personality disorder, they're a nervous system that's been wired for survival in a dangerous environment. Her emotional dysregulation isn't a character flaw. It's a natural response to being raised in chaos. Her relationship difficulties aren't manipulation. They're the result of having her trust systematically destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect her. But because she's been labeled with BPD, she's been treated as if her symptoms are inherent personality traits rather than trauma responses. She's been taught to manage her symptoms rather than heal their cause. She's been convinced that she's fundamentally flawed rather than understanding that she's a trauma survivor who needs healing. This is happening to millions of people right now. They're being given the wrong diagnosis, the wrong treatment, and the wrong prognosis. They're being told they have a personality disorder when they actually have a trauma disorder. They're being condemned to a lifetime of symptom management when they could be healed. Here's another crucial difference that most mental health professionals don't understand: the prognosis. BPD is typically viewed as a chronic condition that can be managed but not cured. People with BPD are told that they'll need to be in therapy for years, possibly decades, and that their symptoms will likely persist throughout their lives. CPTSD, however, has a much more hopeful prognosis. While healing from complex trauma is intensive work, it offers the possibility of genuine recovery. When trauma is properly addressed and healed, the symptoms that resulted from that trauma can be resolved. But here's what's really going to shock you. The mental health system doesn't want you to know this. They don't want you to know that your symptoms might be completely treatable. They don't want you to know that you might not need to be in therapy for the rest of your life. They don't want you to know that what you've been told is a personality disorder might actually be a trauma response that can be healed. This brings us to the most important question. How do you know if you've been misdiagnosed? How do you know if you have CPTSD instead of BPD? First, look at your trauma history. If you experience chronic, repeated trauma, especially in childhood, and your symptoms developed as a result of that trauma, you're more likely to have CPTSD than BPD. This trauma might include physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, or psychological torture from caregivers. Second, examine your sense of self. Do you have a consistently negative self-image, or does your self-perception fluctuate wildly? People with CPTSD typically have a stable, though negative, sense of self. People with BPD have an unstable sense of self that changes frequently. Third, look at your relationship patterns. Do you avoid close relationships because you've learned that intimacy equals danger? Or do you desperately crave connection while simultaneously fearing abandonment? CPTSD typically involves avoidance of intimacy, while BPD involves fear of abandonment. Fourth, consider your emotional responses. Do you tend to shut down emotionally as a protective mechanism, or do you experience intense emotions that shift rapidly? CPTSD often involves emotional numbing, while BPD involves emotional instability. Fifth, examine the treatment you've received. Have you been focused on behavior modification and symptom management, or have you addressed the root trauma that caused your symptoms? If you've been in therapy for years without significant improvement, and the focus has been on managing symptoms rather than healing trauma, you might have been misdiagnosed. But here's the most important thing I want you to understand. Regardless of your diagnosis, you are not broken. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are not doomed to a lifetime of suffering. Your symptoms make sense given what you've been through. Your responses are normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. Whether you have CPTSD or BPD, whether you've been misdiagnosed or correctly diagnosed, the most important thing is that you get the right treatment. And the right treatment is one that addresses the root cause of your symptoms, not just their surface manifestations. If you suspect you've been misdiagnosed, I want you to know that you have options. You can seek a second opinion from a trauma-informed therapist who understands the difference between CPTSD and BPD. You can educate yourself about both conditions and advocate for yourself in the mental health system. You can refuse to accept a diagnosis that doesn't feel right or treatment that isn't working. But most importantly, you can refuse to let any diagnosis define you. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your symptoms. You are not your trauma. You are a whole, complete person who deserves to be understood, respected, and healed. The mental health system has failed you if you've been misdiagnosed. They've failed you if they've given you a label that carries stigma without providing effective treatment. They've failed you if they've convinced you that you're fundamentally flawed instead of helping you understand that you're a trauma survivor who needs healing. But you don't have to accept this failure. You don't have to carry a misdiagnosis for the rest of your life. You don't have to settle for symptom management when healing is possible. Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to get angry. I want you to get angry at a system that has mislabeled you, stigmatized you, and failed to provide you with effective treatment. I want you to get angry at the professionals who have seen your trauma responses and called them personality defects. I want you to get angry at the years you've spent believing you were broken when you were actually just hurt. And then I want you to channel that anger into action. I want you to demand better. I want you to seek out trauma-informed treatment. I want you to find therapists who understand the difference between trauma responses and personality disorders. I want you to refuse to accept a diagnosis that doesn't make sense or treatment that isn't working. Your healing is possible. Your recovery is possible. You are not doomed to a lifetime of suffering because of a misdiagnosis. You are not condemned to carry the stigma of a personality disorder when you might actually be a trauma survivor who needs healing. The difference between CPTSD and BPD isn't just academic, it's the difference between hope and despair, between healing and symptom management, between understanding yourself as a trauma survivor and believing you're fundamentally flawed. You deserve to know the truth about your condition. You deserve to receive effective treatment. You deserve to heal from your trauma instead of just managing its symptoms. You deserve to be seen as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms to be managed. The mental health system has been failing trauma survivors for decades by misdiagnosing them with personality disorders. But you don't have to accept this failure. You don't have to carry a misdiagnosis for the rest of your life. You don't have to settle for less than you deserve. Your trauma responses are not personality defects. Your symptoms are not character flaws. Your struggles are not evidence that you're broken. They're evidence that you survived something that could have destroyed you, and now you have the opportunity to heal. The path to healing starts with understanding what's really wrong. It starts with getting the right diagnosis. It starts with refusing to accept labels that don't serve you and treatment that doesn't work. It starts with believing that you deserve better than what you've been given. You are not broken. You are not disordered. You are not condemned to a lifetime of suffering. You are a trauma survivor who deserves to heal, and that healing is possible regardless of what label you've been given. The truth about CPTSD versus BPD isn't just information, it's liberation. It's the key to understanding yourself, to getting the right treatment, and to reclaiming your life from the trauma that created your symptoms. Don't let anyone tell you that you're fundamentally flawed. Don't let anyone convince you that your trauma responses are personality defects. Don't let anyone limit your potential for healing because of a misdiagnosis. You have the power to change your narrative. You have the power to seek better treatment. You have the power to heal from your trauma instead of just managing its symptoms. And that power starts with understanding the truth about your condition. The misdiagnosis of CPTSD as BPD isn't just a medical error. It's a tragedy that has affected millions of trauma survivors. But it doesn't have to be your tragedy. You can break free from this misdiagnosis. You can find healing. You can reclaim your life. Your journey to healing starts now. Your journey to understanding yourself starts now. Your journey to breaking free from the limitations of misdiagnosis starts now. You are worthy of healing. You are worthy of understanding. You are worthy of being seen for who you really are, not a collection of symptoms to be managed, but a whole person with the capacity for growth, healing, and transformation. The truth will set you free. And the truth is that you are not broken. You are a trauma survivor who deserves to heal.